Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf mem aleph in the Chullin. We are one, two, three, five, 6 lines up from the bottom of mem amabet. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. The topic that we've been discussing is whether or not one has the ability to cause a prohibition on something that doesn't belong to them. And Rav Huna said yesterday, absolutely they can. And here's why. In a situation where someone else's animal is lying in front of an idol, if one cuts one of the pipes, meaning cuts the trachea or the esophagus, the animal becomes prohibited, even to the owner. Because it is a takrovis of avodah zarah. It's an offering of avodah zarah. And now this law that Rabbi Huna said would seem to contradict two rules that we have. One is that in general one cannot cause someone else's property to be prohibited, and the two is that one cannot make a living creature prohibited by either worshiping it or by having it be in service of an idol. And so Rav Huna, though, rules that you can overcome those two general rules if you engage in an action on the item itself. So, for example, even though the item belongs to someone else, if you do the shchita of that animal, that shchita is a sufficient action both to constitute an action on the item that would allow somebody else's property to become prohibited, and would make that living and is enough to make a living creature prohibited in the context of idolatry, even though ordinarily that is not enough. So now, as we pick up at the parenthetical 6 lines from the bottom of Mem Amabet, the Gemara notes that three people disagree with Rav Huna and gives us the siman Naat Siman. So we're going to see why is it Naat? Well, first Rav Nachman, that's the Nun, Rav Amram, that's the Ayin, and Rav Yitzchak, that's the Tzaddik. And so as a result, so that we don't usually use a Yud, especially in connection with names, as a siman, because usually that there are so many yud names in Hebrew, and that we don't that it won't be a sufficient mnemonic in order to tell you who it is. So in any event, these three, what do they say? Amri, they all say, Ein Adam Oser Davar She'ein Shalo. You cannot cause a prohibition on something that does not belong to you. Now, again, there's a limitation to that. Every one of them would agree that if you combine meat with milk, that all of which I own, you would successfully make that meat and milk prohibited. So there is a limitation on it, but in general, you don't have the ability to make my things prohibited ordinarily. And so as a result, in the case where Rav Huna said that if somebody slaughtered the animal in front of the idol, it would be prohibited, where Rav Huna says that, these three would say, no, it's not prohibited. You don't have the ability to make my animal into some kind of thing that worshipped an idol. And so as a result, the shchita might not be good. That will be a separate question. But certainly, I could sell my animal as meat in the marketplace to non-Jews, and would be able to take the money and proceeds that are associated with it and benefit from it. So, Mesve, we're going to ask a series of questions, 3 questions on this position, saying how can you say this if we see in several situations that it seems like one can make something that doesn't belong to them prohibited, because what did we say in the brisa that we cited earlier yesterday? Hashochet chatas b'Shabbos, if you slaughter a sin offering on Shabbos, b'chutz, outside the Beis Hamikdash, la'avodas kol chavim, as an idolatrous service, chayav shalosh chataot, you are subject to 3 sin offerings. Because you've effectively, assuming that you did it inadvertently, in the sense that you didn't realize it was Shabbos, you didn't realize that it was a prohibited thing to do outside the Beis Hamikdash, and you didn't realize that that doing this idolatry was going to be prohibited. So in all 3 of those situations, you didn't know that what you were doing was wrong, and you did it, and so now you're going to be subject to 3 chataot. Pagum. And we explained that this situation must be talking about a bird chatas that is already missing part of its windpipe, and therefore even a little bit of shchita will both make it a successful sacrifice and make it a idolatrous service. Because if in fact, because significantly, a chatas offering does no longer belongs to the owner of that chatas offering because he's sanctified it to the Beis Hamikdash, and so as a result, even though it doesn't belong to him, as soon as you do the service, this was of course consistent with Rav Huna's view. You've turned it into an idolatrous service, but at the same time, you finish the sacrifice. But if, in fact, the only reason that all of these happen at the same moment is because we're talking about a sin offering of a bird. That's why they all happen at the same time, as we turn to Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. But Aval Zevach Lo, but if you were to have an animal sacrifice, that would not be the case because once you slaughtered, once you engaged in any amount of slaughter of the pipes of that of that larger animal, you would have completed an aspect of idolatrous service. The animal would now be prohibited to benefit from, and therefore is no longer a valid chatat. And so, how come? So, in that situation, according to that's the way Rav Huna viewed it. But according to this view, where you cannot cause something that doesn't belong to you be prohibited, v'i ein adam oser davar she'ena shalo. If you don't have the ability to cause this chatas offering to be prohibited, even though it doesn't belong to you any longer, my area chatas oaf. Why did you need to specify a bird chatas? Afilu chatas behemanami, even a larger animal as well. Even when you've done the idolatrous service, the animal is not considered an idolatrous prohibition. You are liable for idolatry, but it's still considered a chatas, and therefore when you finish the shchita of that chatas, you will be subject to an independent obligation to bring a new chatas. And so as a result, why are we limiting this case to a bird chatas? As Rashi says, the ein adam, second Rashi on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, the ein adam and oser davar she'ena shalom, my area de tani oaf. Why did we have to specifically learn about a bird? Afilu behemanami, even a larger animal. De halo paka shem kodshemine. Because even when you've engaged in the idolatrous service, the title of being a sanctified animal will not leave it because it doesn't itself become prohibited. Umihu, ihu mechayev. Nonetheless, of course, even though it's no longer subject, the animal itself, because it belongs to someone else, doesn't become prohibited. You, who or the one who engaged in this idolatrous service with this animal, would still be liable, mishum ovid govadas kuchavim. You'd still be liable for idolatry, and therefore subject to bringing another chatas. The mikomokom afagatalo mitzera mifla miflach palcha. Even though you have not successfully caused the animal to be prohibited, you certainly engaged in idolatrous worship, and now that while you didn't know that it was prohibited, and therefore you won't be stoned or you won't be punished with misa, you'll still be subject to the chatas offering. And so therefore it all would work even with a larger animal. So why did we specify that it's specifically talking about a bird chatas where you only have to cut one pipe, and therefore even that little bit of additional that already had part of the pipe already cut, so any additional amount would satisfy both the sacrifice and the engagement in idolatry? So kevin de kanya lechapara kididei damya. No, the answer is that yes, in general, you don't have the ability to cause prohibition of something that doesn't belong to you. But here, because this is your sin offering, you still are considered an owner because that sin offering will provide atonement for you. And therefore, if it were to be a other kind of sacrifice, as soon as you engaged in any of the shchita process for the idolatrous service, the animal would now become prohibited to you, and therefore it would no longer be subject to being a chatas, and therefore you wouldn't be liable for offering a chatas outside the Beis Hamikdash. And so therefore it has to be talking about a bird, so that the moment that you're doing the slaughter of the bird and it fulfills the obligation of the chatas, of the bird chatas, you're also fulfilling you're also successfully accomplishing the idolatrous service, and therefore both are happening at the same time, and therefore you can be liable to the two chataot for those two things, and of course you're also liable for the chatas for violating Shabbos. So that was question number one and our response. Now, question number two, Tashma, 1 second. Shnayim ochazim. We saw in our Mishnah that if two people hold the knife together, bisakin, they're both holding the knife, vishochatin, and they're both doing the slaughter together. One is holding the handle, one is holding the blade. Echad l'shum echad. We call elu. One is having in mind one of the items that we mentioned, namely the mountains, the hills, the rivers, the seas, the deserts, dabar kasher, and one is having in mind the proper intentions to engage in shchita. We say shchita so psula, the shchita is invalid. Now we did not specify which of these people was the owner, so as a result, it implies that it doesn't make a difference which one is the owner. So as a result, doesn't that show that the non-owner's intentions can cause the owner's animal to be forbidden? No, that's not the case. We're dealing with a situation where there was a partnership in the animal, and therefore they were both owners, and so you're not causing a prohibition of something that doesn't belong to you, you're causing a prohibition of something that does belong to you. So Tashma, what about the following case, which we saw? This is a Mishnah in Gittin Nun Bet Amud Bet. Hamitame, one who causes tuma to apply to, and Rashi tells us the specific situation. Hamitame, take a look at Rashi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down. 10 lines down. End of the line. Hamitame, and you can keep your finger on the Rashi. Hamitame, taharo shel chaveiro. If you cause tuma to apply to somebody else's tahor food, or v'hamidameya, or you hamidameya, and Rashi tells us truma b'chulin. You took truma and you mixed it with the chulin shel chaveiro, and you took the truma and mixed it with the chulin, the non truma produce of your friend, or back into the Gemara, ham v'haminasech, and Rashi tells us yayin shel chaveiro la'avodas kochavim. You pour out and do a libation of wine for avodah zara with the wine that doesn't belong to you. So now the question that this Mishnah is dealing with is, what is the liability of the actor? B'shogeg patur. If you did it inadvertently, you are exempt. B'mezid chayav. But if you did it intentionally, you are going to be liable. So now Rashi tells us it's basically smack in the middle of the Rashi in the narrow lines. Pater milashalim, v'afal gaf. Now you might be thinking, why should you be exempt? Because don't we say demazik b'shogeg chayiv, that one who does damage even inadvertently is liable? Kedekaimalan, as we explained in Baba Kama Daf Kaf Vav Amud Aleph, Adam Muad La'olam. We have a concept that a human being is always responsible for their actions. So why would they not be responsible here? And the Gemara continues over there. Bein Ar doesn't make a difference whether he's awake. Ben Yashan doesn't make a difference if he's sleeping. Bein Shogeg, whether he does it inadvertently, Ben Bezid doesn't make a difference if he did it intentionally. Hacha. But here, so why do we say that that this is not going to be liable? Hacha hezek she'eno nikarhu. This is not obvious from looking at the item. You cannot tell the difference between tamei produce and non-tamei produce. You cannot tell the difference between produce that had truma mixed in and produce that did not. You cannot tell the difference between yayin nesech and yayin that has not been poured for idolatry. And so as a result, the lo shmei hezek. We have a principle that when you can't tell by looking at it that any damage was done, that is not considered damage. And so therefore, you're not going to be liable. Well, in that case, why would you be liable if you did it intentionally? Ubemezid chayav l'sholem dikansu rabbanan. But if you do it intentionally, the rabbis make you liable. And so as a result, umushum to come. Oh, 1 second. So now you might be saying, well, 1 second. In the case of menasech, where you're doing it for idolatry, isn't the person going to be liable for the death penalty for having done it? And once you're liable for the death penalty, you shouldn't be liable for any damages. So Rashi explains, "Umushum de kamle b'derabba mine lo miftar," but you are not going to be exempt based on the principle of applying only the most serious punishment. V'afal gaf dechayav misa, even if you would be liable for the death penalty. Why? Mishum avodas kochavim. Because, and even if you would be liable to the death penalty because of the idolatry. V'afilu lo hisrubo, and even similarly, if you weren't even warned. Delo mikdal, because even when one is not killed, kaimalan chayve misos shogegin, if you do something that would ordinarily make you subject to the death penalty, but you do it on inadvertently, peturin, you are going to be milashalim, you're putter from paying. So why in this case are you going to be liable? Hachachayev, here you're liable, afilu isrube, even if the person was warned. As we explained back there in Maseches Gittin, Daf Nun Bet, Mishad Agbahaya Almanat Osro Michayev Lishlume. As soon as one picks up the wine in order to pour it as yayin nesech, and thereby then the rabbis say that you are liable. But when do you become actually liable for the death penalty? Lo havi ad shas nisach. That doesn't happen until you actually do the nesicha. And so as a result, because these two things are happening at different times, it is one of the exceptions to kumle b'derabamine, that we don't apply kumle b'derabamine when you first, the bottom line is that if you burn somebody's, or if you burn somebody's field down, you can't then say, oh, all right, well, you know what? I'm now going to go and violate Shabbos, be subject to the death penalty, and that way I won't have to pay you back. That does not work. It's only, say you burn the person's field down on Friday. The bottom line is only when your burning of the field is the thing that is also violating Shabbos, so then we'll say kumle b'derabamine. But you can't use it in a post facto way to get out of the situation. So, but bottom line is the implication of this Mishnah over there in Gittin Nun Bet Amud Bet is the fact that you are obviously making the items that belong to somebody else unable to benefit from them. That's why you're going to be liable for them. If the menasech didn't actually cause the wine to be prohibited, there wouldn't be any damage and there wouldn't be any reason for him to pay. And so doesn't that clearly show that Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, and Rav Yitzchak are wrong, and that actually we do have the ability to make somebody else's things not in that prohibited, and such that you can't benefit from them? No, hachanami de isle shutafut begava. So Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, and Rav Yitzchak would all say, no, this is a case where the person who was doing the contamination, the mixing, or the nesicha had an interest in the produce, and that is why he was making it. He was able to make it prohibited. So Kitanai, and all of this actually suggests that maybe we actually have a machlokes Tanaim as to whether or not we say a person can cause a prohibition on something that doesn't belong to them. As we say, Ovid kochavim shenisach yeno shal Yisrael shalo b'fnei avodas kochavim. If a non-Jew, an idolater, does a libation out with a Jew's wine, not in front of the idolater, not in front of the idol itself. Asaro, he has caused the wine to become prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, Matirino, so b'mnei shnei dvarim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba say, no, that wine is still permitted for two different reasons. Echad she'em menachskin yayin ela b'fnei avodas kochavim. One is nisuch yayin only is an idolatrous service if it is in front of the idol. And so as a result, you didn't actually, the non-Jew did not actually do an idolatrous service. And moreover, the Jew can say to the idolater, Lo kol hemnach shetes or yeni lo see. You don't have the ability to make my wine prohibited without my permission. Only if I give you permission to touch the wine is it going to result in it. Now, of course, this is speaking from a biblical perspective. The easiest way to understand this is speaking from a biblical perspective. From a rabbinic perspective, of course, the rabbis do say that if a non-Jew touches your wine and your wine is not mavushal, well, then that wine is going to be prohibited. But the simplest way to understand this dispute among the Tanaim is that it's talking about biblically. But the bottom line is that we see that according to the Tanakama, the non-Jew has the ability to cause the prohibition of your wine, of your produce, even though he doesn't own it, whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava both say that you can't cause something that doesn't belong to you to become prohibited. So doesn't that show that this is a machlokas among Tanaim? And so the answer to some extent is yes, meaning clearly, according to Rav Huna, he clearly disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava because he specifically says that you can make something invalid even when it's not owned by you. But Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak Amri, but Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchak Amram, and Rav Yitzchak would say, Afilu Amanda Amar Oser Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shalo. Even according to the Tanakama, who says that you can cause such a prohibition, Hani Mili Kuti. That's talking only about non-Jews. Yes, a non-Jew, according to the Tanakama, has that ability. Aval Yisra, right? Because that's what the case is. The case is about a non-Jew. And the implication is, Aval Yisrael, Litzaure Kamikavin. But according to this, but a Jew, if a Jew did the action, he's not really trying to engage in idolatry. He's just trying to cause you agmas nefesh. He's just trying to aggravate you and upset you. And so that's what he's trying to do. He's not actually trying to do idolatry, and therefore, even though he wants you to think that your item is prohibited, but in fact, it would not be prohibited. And because of that, we're going to say that, in fact, according to Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, and Rav Yitzchak, everybody agrees to them that that a Jew does not ordinarily have the power to make something else that a Jew owns prohibited. Tashma, 1 second. What about our Mishnah? Shnaim ochsim b'sakin b'shochatin. That if you two people hold a knife and do the slaughter, echad l'shum echad mikol elu, one for any of the reasons that we said, meaning that they do it for the mountain or the hills or the sea or the rivers or the desert, ve'echad l'shum davar kasher, and the other person's thinking about something that they are allowed to do. Shchita so psula, it's invalid. So again, doesn't this show that in fact that's a case of Jewish people doing something? And again, doesn't that show that in fact you can make something prohibited even if you're Jewish and it doesn't belong to you? No. That could be talking about a Jewish apostate. And so as a result, we're going to treat that Jewish apostate just like a non-Jew, and therefore it's going to stay. He does have the ability to cause it to be prohibited, just like a non-Jew, and so that would follow the viewpoint of the Tanakama in the brisa that we cited. So Tashma, Hamitame v'hamidameya v'haminasech. Well, what about this situation where it says that you make somebody other things tame, or you mix it with truma, or you do nisach hayayin? B'shogeg pater b'mezid chayiv. Again, we're dealing with a Jew doing it, and he's not liable if he did it inadvertently, but he is liable if he did it intentionally. Doesn't that again show that we're in a situation where you doesn't that show that we're in a situation where you can cause a prohibition? After all, why should, if we say that he's just joking when he does Nisach Hamayim, why is he liable at all? The Nisach Hamayim, the Nisach Hayayin, excuse me, when he does the Nisach Hayayin, the wine is still going to be usable by the owner. And so why would he be liable for any kind of damage? So no, Hachinamin b'Yisrael Mumar. We can say that that case is also talking about where the person who's doing it is a Jewish apostate, and therefore we're treating him like a non-Jew. Amar le Rav Acha brei de Rava le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha asked the following to Rav Ashi: Hisrubo the kibul alav hasra mai. If you have a Jew who has until this point not been an apostate, and now you ask him a question, right? So the Rashi tells us Hisruba it's one, two, three from the top of the wide lines of Rashi. It's 9 lines down. Hisrubo, but Yisrael shelo yishchat la'avodas kochavim. That we're talking about a Jew that has not done the slaughter yet of for idolatry. The shochat la'achar shekibul hasra, and now he's going to do the shechita after he's received the warning. The kodem l'chein lo haya b'cheskas mumar, and before this he was not considered a mumar. So in that situation where the person who's doing the shechita has accepted upon himself that he will be subject to the death penalty if he does this, what's the story? Do we say clearly he's intending to do it for idolatry? But we also say that a Jew who's not a mumar doesn't have the ability to prohibit something that doesn't belong to him. So what's the story? Do we say that this is prohibited or not? So Amar Le, Rav Ashi responds, Hitir atzmo lemisa kamrat. You're talking about a situation where the person has subjected themselves to the death penalty. Ein lecha mumar gadol mizeh. There is no one who is a greater mumar than somebody who has done that. And so as a result, clearly the item itself, the animal itself will be prohibited, even though he was effectively not really a mumar until he accepted the death penalty on himself for engaging in that behavior. Okay, so the next Mishnah, my apologies for not scrolling. So the next Mishnah is, we've outlined certain idolatrous slaughter in the last Mishnah, namely to mountains and to seas and the like. And now we're going to do cases that appear idolatrous, even if not done for that purpose. So, and so as a result, we'll see that these are basically cases of Maris Ayin. This is a very significant Gemara for the purposes of understanding the concept of Maris Ayin, of appearing to do the wrong thing. Ein shochadin lo tok yamim. You're not allowed to slaughter the animal, and as Rashi tells us, alatok yamim, delo limru lisara diyama kashachet. We're worried that people will see what you did, that you're slaughtering the animal into the sea so that the blood all goes into the sea, and people will think that you're slaughtering it to the sea gods. The lolatok narod, and you can't do it to the river for the same reason. Lolatok kalim, and you can't do it into a vessel because we're worried that maybe you're going to keep the blood and do some kind of service with it outside the Beis Hamikdash. Aval shochedu latok ugo shomayim, but you can do the shechita into a pool of water. Uvesfina al gabi kelim, and if you're in a boat, you can do it onto vessels. And Rashi explains why can you do it onto vessels. Uvesfina yachol lishchot al gav hakelim. Then you can do it into a vessel, the Adam shoses l'toch hayam, and even though now it'll flow from those vessels into the sea, shalolachlech as hasvina, because it's clear that you're just concerned about not getting your boat dirty. And that's not quite the same thing as appearing to slaughter it into the sea directly, as if you're serving the idols. Okay, and so aval. All right, so ein shochatin leguma kol ikar. You can't slaughter into a pit at all. Aval oseguma betok beito, but you can slaughter into a pit bishvil sheyikanes adam letocha, if in your house, so that the blood goes into that. Uvashuk lo yasekein, but in the marketplace you can't do that. Shalo, as we turn to mem bet amud bet, mem aleph amud bet, excuse me. Shalo yichakeh es hatzedukim, because we don't want to strengthen the tzedukim, as Rashi tells us, top Rashi on Mem Aleph on Bet, Yachzich Yedeim B'chukoseim. You're going to strengthen their practices because that is something that they do, and so we have to be careful about not doing that. So now the Gemara tries to understand the distinction between the sea and a pool of water. So ein shochin lo l'toch l'chulu. So my shna latoch yamim delo. We're going to be concerned that you're slaughtering to the spirit of the sea. Latoch uga shalmayim nami. Well, when you go into a pool of water, amre levavua kashachet, you're slaughtering to your reflection, maybe. So amarava ba'churim shanu. We're talking about murky water, so therefore you don't have to worry about that. Ein shochten leguma, meaning just as you don't daven in front of a mirror, you shouldn't, daven in front of a reflecting pool either, if you can see yourself. Ein shochten leguma, you don't slaughter into a pit. Well, second, v'ha amrit ein shochten leguma klal. You said that you don't slaughter in it at all. Well, what you just then said that you could slaughter it in your house. So Amar Abaye, Reisha Beguma Shabashuk. No, when we say you can't slaughter at all, we're talking about in the marketplace. But when you're talking about in your house, you can do it. Amrle Rava doesn't like that answer. V'hamid Tani Seva, but the Seva itself says Uvashuk lo yasekein, that you can't do it in the marketplace. So Miklal de Reisha la b'shuk askinan, implying that the beginning part of the Mishnah the earlier part of the Mishnah is not talking about the marketplace. So Ella Amar Rava Hakikamer. So Rava says this is what we're talking about. Ein shokten leguma kol ikar. You cannot slaughter into a pit, period. Rotzalin, not care chatzero. So how do you keep your yard clean? Ketzad hu osa. What should he do? Osa makom chutz leguma v'shochet. You make a little area outside the pit, and then you slaughter there. The dam shoses v'yored leguma, and then the blood will trickle into the pit. So you don't go into the pit directly, but you do it. But you can have a pit, and you can have the blood go in there indirectly. Uvishuk lo yasakein, but in the marketplace you don't do that. Shalo yichak as tzedukim, because again we're worried about strengthening the practices of the tzedukim who would worship, effectively would worship on some level the ground. So Tanya Kavase de Rava, and there's a brisa that says the same thing. Haya mahalit basfina. If somebody's going in a boat, the ein lo makom basfina l'shchot, and there's no place on the boat to slaughter. Motzi yadachutz l'sfina v'shochet. You can stick your hand out of the boat and slaughter the animal there. Now the boat is going to be, the bottom of the boat is a little wider than the top of the boat, so the blood will go along the dam shoses the yored al dofne asfina. So the blood will then go along the side of the boat and into the sea. And that won't be a problem. But one does not slaughter directly into a pit. So what do you do if you want to keep your yard clean? You make a space outside the pit, and you shech there. And the blood will go into that. And don't do it in the marketplace. Don't follow their practices. And if you do that, well, then you need to check after that kind of person, because maybe they're not really the greatest person. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Mem Aleph Amud Bet, Shema Minhu, maybe he is a apostate, min la'avodah zara, la'avodas kolchavim. He's an apostate for his idolatry. V'yivdulu mipato umiyaino, and you have to separate from his bread and wine. Okay, so we're now at the next Mishnah. Hashochet l'shem ola. What if you slaughter and you say that I'm slaughtering this as an ola? You didn't make the animal an ola. It's very important to understand that we're talking about, and Rashi says Hashochet Chullin b'chutz. We're talking about slaughtering non-sacred animals outside the Beis Hamikdash, and we say l'shem ola. Rashi tells us second Rashi on the Mishnah, the Kevan deba beneder ubenidava, since an ola is brought either through a vow or a free will offering, meaning that either you commit yourself to bring an ola, or you commit that this animal will be an ola. Haroa, somebody who sees you doing this, Omer, Akshavhu makdish, will say that, oh, now the person is sanctifying this animal, v'shoktala ola, and is now slaughtering it as an ola. The kachim b'chutz mutarim, and this is showing that they must have changed the rules, and now it turns out that you're allowed to slaughter animals outside the Beis Hamikdash. The Gazer Rabbanan, and the rabbis made a gzeira aleha, puzzle, to say that this is ala psul, and the rabbis made the gzeira to say that this is going to be invalid. V'kein shlamim v'chulu, and same thing with the other kinds of animals as well. L'shem zvachim, also for other kinds of sacrifices. Usually a zevach, it refers to all animal sacrifices, but here it's likely referring to shlamim. L'shem asham talui, for an asham talui, that's the conditional asham that one brings if one is uncertain whether one did something that would require them to bring a chatas. L'shem pesach, to bring a korban pesach. L'shem toda, to bring a korban toda. Shchita so psula. In all those cases, the shchita is invalid. Rabbi Shimon Machshir, Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher, and as Rashi tells us, this is Rashi just opposite the end of the Tostos on the right-hand side of the page. So on the left-hand side of the page, you have the Rashi of Rabbi Shimon Machshir. Lo chayesh lamaris ahayin. He's not worried about this concern about people reaching the wrong conclusion about certain behaviors based on what you're doing. Shnayim, now we have a new rule. Shnayim oksim besakim v'shoktin. If two people are holding a knife together, and so echad l'shem echad mikol elu ve'echad l'shem davar kasher. One of them is thinking about one of these kinds of sacrifices, and the other one is thinking about a kosher shchita. Shchita sam psula, it's invalid, even though they work together. Hashochet l'shem chatas. If, on the other hand, you slaughter for a sin offering, l'shem osham v'adoi, for a definite osham, l'shem bechor, for as a firstborn animal, l'shem meiser, or as a meiser behema, l'shem tamura, or as an exchanged animal for another kind of korban. In all those cases, shchita so kshera, then the slaughter is kosher. Ze'aklal, here's the rule. Kol davar shenidar v'nidav hashochet l'shmo asur. If you have the possibility to bring it as a vow or free will offering, well, then it's going to be prohibited because we're worried that you're doing that item right now. But she'eno nidar v'nidav hashochet l'shmo kasher. But if in fact you slaughter the animal for one of these things that is not brought through a vow or a free will offering, then it will be a valid shchita because we're not worried, because nobody is going to say, oh, this person is bringing a sacrifice now. They're just going to think that you're not really that intelligent and not saying something that makes any sense. But they're not going to think that right now you're bringing a sacrifice. And we are going to see that the Gemara is effectively going to qualify all of these other situations to situations where people know that you're not liable for these different offerings. If people knew that you were liable for these offerings and then you said it, then we would be worried about it, and your slaughter would not be a valid slaughter. So let's take a look. Hashochech l'shem ola. If you slaughter for an ola, and then it continued with telling us about that asham taloi. Asham taloi bar nidar v'nidavhu. 1 second though, you've categorized an asham taloi, which is a conditional chatas offering. That if you're not sure whether a chatas is liable, whether you're liable to a chatas, you bring an asham taloi. Well, that's not a vowed offering or a donated offering. So Rabbi Yochanan Hamani Rabbi Elazar he. This is according to Rabbi Elazar. To Amar Misnadev Adam Asham Taloi B'Chol Yom. That according to him, you can donate an Asham Tali every day because every day you certainly engaged in some kind of behavior that would have resulted that maybe you would have resulted in a chatas. So Pesach bar nida v'nidarhu. But once again, what about the next item on the list? That's a korban Pesach. That's not donated or vowed. So zimna kavile. It's got a fixed time associated with it. So how could people will know that you are just joking around if you say that you're doing it for a Pesach? So I'm Rabbi Oshia, shiny Pesach, hoa b'hafrasha, so kol hashana kula. No, you can separate the Pesach at any time of the year, and therefore it is like a free will offering. Rabbi Yanai, lo shanu ela tamimim. And the whole thing that we say that we're worried about your intentions and that therefore the animal is going to be an invalid shchita and not a kosher shchita, so you can't eat it, that's where the animal is unblemished. About Bali Mumin, made the Yediyah. But everybody knows that you can't bring a blemished animal outside the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, if you were to be slaughtering a blemished animal and you say that this is for an Ola, everybody knows that you're not actually sacrificing something outside the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Afilu bali mumin nami. Even blemished animals, it's going to be a problem because zimnin dimramile midi amuma velo yediyah. Maybe the person will put something over the mum, and the people won't actually have noticed that it actually has a mum, and therefore what matters is the appearance that you created, and you can create that appearance of a non-mum animal. So that's the end of that discussion. Hashochet, and now we go to the end of the Mishnah where it said Hashochet l'shem chatas, that the shechita is valid if you slaughter it as a chatas. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan. When is it going to be valid? So that is only going to be true if lo shanu ela she'enu mechuyev chatas, where the person is not liable for a chatas. Aval mechuyev chatas, if he is liable for a chatas, ema l'shum chataso hu oseh. Then we have to be worried that he's doing this for the purpose of his sin offering. 1 second though, v'halo kamer l'shem chatasi. He didn't say for my chatas. He said just for a chatas in theory, in general. So Amar Rabbi Abahu comes to the rescue and explains, no, but Omer l'shem chatasi. When would it be a problem if he were to say that he was bringing a chatas outside the Beis Hamikdash, even though the animal is not sanctified, and we'll say that the animal is not going to be kosher? If he's liable for a chatas offering and he says that it's for my chatas that he's doing this shchita, if he says that, well, then in that case the animal is not going to be kosher, even though the animal was never sanctified, because we are worried about people thinking that the slaughter is a valid slaughter. So, l'shem tamura. What about the tamura case? Rabbi Lazar again qualifies the situation. Lo shanu ela she'ein lo zevach b'tok beito. We're dealing with a situation where he doesn't have another sacrifice within his house for which this animal can serve as a tamura, as a substitute. Aval yesh lo zevach b'tok beito. But if he does have such an animal, meaning it is possible for him to think that this animal, and for people to think that this animal is a tamura, ema amure amirlei bay. Maybe he is doing some kind of substitution, and so therefore we have to be worried about it, and it wouldn't be a valid shchita. V'halo ka'amar l'shem tumuras zivchi, but he didn't say that he's doing a tamura for his offering. And when you don't say that, then it's not a tamura. So Amar Rabbi Abahu ba'omer l'shem tamura zivchi. So no, we're dealing with where he says that it is a tamura for my offering, and that is a situation where if in fact he had an offering inside his house, we would say that if he did this, the shchita would not be valid. And when we say in our Mishnah that a tamura saying that you're slaughtering this animal as a tamura, it's still going to be a valid shchita. That is either where he says that I'm just slaughtering it for a tamura, then it doesn't matter whether he's got something in his house or he doesn't, because he's not referencing any other sacrifices. And even if he says l'shem tamura zivchi, if he doesn't have a sacrifice in his house, so then again it'll be a valid sacrifice because there is no tamura. Everybody knows that there's no tamura. So Zeklal. So now we had at the end of the Mishnah, we had a general rule. So general rules usually come to teach us something. So La Tuye Mai. What's the general rule coming to teach us? La Tuye Olas Nazir. It's telling us about the Ola of a Nazir. Demau Detema. What might I have thought? Halo Nadar. This person never vowed to become a Nazir, and so as a result, everybody knows that, and therefore this is should be viewed as a this Ola of a Nazir should be viewed as like the latter categories in our Mishnah, and therefore should be a valid, the slaughter should be valid. And so as a result, everything should be fine. So Amar Nadar Bitsina. No, we do have to worry about him vowing secretly, and therefore if he were to say that I'm bringing this as an Olas Nazir, it is going to be it is not a valid shchita because we're worried that he was secretly a Nazir, as Rashi tells us that he was secretly a Nazir. Kamash Malan. No. Demau de Tema, 4 lines up from the bottom of the Rashi. Leka lemichash lechorba. We shouldn't be worried about any kind of bad thing happening. Demei de yadi, the halo nadar. Everybody knows that he didn't become a Nazir. So Kamash Malan, Demeimar Amri, that when this person says this, Dilma Nadar Betsina Zesh Loshim Yom. Shehu Stam Nazirut. Maybe he actually said that he was going to be a Nazir for 30 days, which is the length of time if you just say you're going to be a Nazir without qualifying it. Ubishloshim Yom Lo Minkar Milsa Lishchanav. And as a result, because it's such a short time period, maybe he got his haircut immediately beforehand, and therefore it wasn't never obvious to his neighbors that he became a Nazir. So as a result, that's why if the person were to say that I'm bringing it as an Olas Nazir, we have to be worried that maybe he was obligated in it, and therefore it's going to be an invalid slaughter, and therefore because out of the concern of Maris Ayin. V'she'enu nidav v'nidav. What about in the other direction, where it's said that it's not going to be something that was vowed? We had basically the general rule in both directions. So what does that come to teach us? La toye olas yoledis. It's coming to teach us about an ola of a woman who gave birth. That is something that presumably, if you know about it, that people would know about it, and therefore, with the if somebody says that that I'm slaughtering this animal, like an ola of a yoledes, like an ola of a woman who gave birth, we're going to say it is a valid shchita. And Amar Rabbi Lazar qualifies it. Lo shanu el she'ein lo isha. That's only true if the man doesn't have a wife. If he has a wife, of al yesh lo isha, Amar l'shema huosa. Maybe he's doing it for his wife, and therefore we have to be concerned. So Bahalo Ka'amar L'Shem Olas Ishti, but he didn't say that it was for his wife's Ola. So Rabbi Abau again comes to our rescue. But Omer L'Shem Olas Ishti. We're talking about a situation where he says it's for his wife. Pshita. Well, then it's obvious if he has a wife and he says that he has a wife and he's doing it for his wife. Well, then for sure we have to be worried that it's going to be that people will see it and be concerned that he's doing a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore the shchita should not be a valid shchita. That's obvious. No, it's not necessarily so obvious. As we turn to the top of Membed Amud Aleph, Ma'udetema im Isa Diyalda Kala Havalei. I might have thought that if the wife gave birth, everybody would know. Everybody would be wishing him a mazel tov, and so as a result, maybe you would say that only if you knew about the baby, then if the person says that if he did it for his wife, it would be invalid. But if nobody knew about a baby, maybe it would not be invalid. Maybe it would be a good shchita because everybody knows that he's not doing it for any real reason. No, Kamash Malan come to teach us that, in fact, no, we are worried that even if we haven't heard about any baby, Amar Apuli Apil, maybe she had a miscarriage and nobody knows about the miscarriage. But so as long as the man is married and he says that he's doing it as an ola for his wife, well, then we have to treat this animal as not kosher. But if, in fact, he were to say, and if he's not married, and he says that he's doing this as an ola of a woman who gave birth, well, then we do not need to worry about Maris Ayin in that case, and therefore we can say that it is a valid shchita. So Hadron Alacha Shochet, Hadron Alacha Shochet, Hadron Alacha Shochet. We are done with the second chapter. We have, finished the second chapter of Masechet Chullin, and God willing, we will pick up with the third chapter of Masechet Chullin, God willing, tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.